When school ended, I would make my way over to the hospital where my mother was staying. The hospital was further from my grandparents' house than my middle school. To reach it, I had to walk a good 2 kilometers, first descending a slope, then climbing back up. I didn't have a bicycle, and asking for bus fare would have been unpleasant, so I always traveled that road on foot. Of course, it wasn't pleasant, but I'd developed an obstinate streak in my own right. That hike had become part of my daily routine.
あら、榊さん。こんにちは。
A familiar nurse called out to me as I walked down a familiar hallway.
こんにちは。今日はお母さん、朝から具合もいいみたいよ。ご飯もちゃんと食べてるし。そうですか。こうやって榊さんが毎日お見舞いに来てくれるからね。きっと。そんなことは。
Equivocating with a weak smile, I nodded to the nurse and walked away. My mother's condition was always seesawing from improvement to setback. It wasn't the sort of disease that could be cured with some wonder drug. And in Mother's case, the doctors didn't entirely understand the causes of her illness, or the reasons she wasn't healing. There was no clear path to a complete recovery. By that point, I understood that my existence had a great deal to do with her sickness. My visits couldn't possibly have been helping her. It was probably just the opposite. I walked rapidly toward room 301 in the A ward. There was a part of me that thought those visits were pointless. Without them, I would have lost the only thing I had left, my origins. Even as I isolated myself behind an inconspicuous appearance, in that one place, I desperately sought some kind of connection.
お母さん。
My mother had been given a private room. The hospital's administrator was an old acquaintance of my grandfather, so it had been arranged at a considerable discount, or so our gossipy neighbors believed. It was a pure white room, largely empty except for the plain medical bed standing by the window. My mother passed her days lying there. There was no medical reason she couldn't go out, but she never tried.
あ、由美子。今日も来てくれたのね。
My mother greeted me with the most convincing smile she could force onto her face. But that face didn't turn toward me.
今日は具合がいいって、さっき看護師さんが。
Setting up a folding chair at her bedside, I began to speak. Her physician had asked me to fill the visits with conversation. Even the silliest little things will do. Just keep talking to her, please.
ご飯もちゃんと食べられて、よかったね。
But I filled every moment with silly chat for a different reason entirely.
そう。それでね。
The conversation was almost entirely one-sided. My mother's responses were mostly monosyllabic. It was difficult to tell if she was even listening. Even so, I continued to chatter away.
今日もいい天気だね。
Eventually, I ran out of things to talk about, and changed the topic to weather out of desperation. But by then, even the monosyllabic responses had trickled to a halt. Time flowed by in silence. 1 minute of stillness. 3. 5. Finally, my mother slowly opened her mouth to speak. Even before the words came, my body twitched in alarm.
ごめんね。本当に。お母さん、こんなんで。そんなこと。
When my mother spoke to me, it was always to deliver an apology. That was why I babbled away so persistently. I didn't want to give her the chance to speak.
今日はもう帰るね。そう。
Folding the chair with a few practiced movements, I leaned it against the small shelf on the wall.
それじゃあ、また明日。
I came to this place in search of connection, and every day I went home with nothing but disappointment. To be honest, those visits were painful for me. Sometimes I thought about how much nicer it would be just to stop coming entirely. But without my faint connection to my mother, I would be adrift in a sea of nothingness. I had no choice but to hold stubbornly to that single lifeline. I wasn't under any illusions that my conversations with Mom were doing her any good. In fact, her physician had begun to indirectly allude otherwise. Something along the lines of, "You don't have to come every single day, dear." But I was afraid. What if my mother did recover? If I abandoned her now, she might not take me back with her when she returned to our old home. I didn't have many pleasant memories at that place, but at least there I was something other than an object of scorn. At least there I had something like an identity, and I couldn't return unless my mother took me with her. I hated myself for those selfish thoughts, but I didn't stop visiting. Pushing everything that had brought us out there out of my mind, I clung stubbornly to the childish hope of a happy ending waiting around the corner. The first year of my middle school life flowed by aimlessly. The only thing I had gained in that time was a bit of textbook knowledge. Apart from that, I hadn't learned a thing. I'm fairly sure my grades were good. I didn't want to give anyone the chance to criticize me on that front. Becoming a difficult child would be too risky. My place in the world was tenuous enough as it was. Thinking back on it now, I might have been just happier running away. But having spent my entire life shut up inside a box, the idea of trying to escape didn't even occur to me. Just as 1 year ago, I said goodbye to no one in particular and left the house alone. Nothing had changed. The scenery was the same. My life was the same. Everything in that country town was static.
奥様と旦那様を恨まないでやってくださいな。元はとてもお優しい方だったんですよ。
That morning, when Toshie-san handed me my lunch, I found myself grumbling a few rare complaints about my situation. The targets were mainly my grandparents. We'd been living together for many years now, and still they only spoke to me when absolutely necessary. Every moment I spent in that house made me feel as if I was slowly suffocating.
だけど、おじいちゃんもおばあちゃんも、まるで私がいないかのような態度を取るんだもの。貧すれば心も鈍する。今は由美子嬢ちゃんに構って差し上げられる余裕がないんですよ。家業の具合がようなれば、それも変わってくると思いますからの。そうなのかしら。由美子嬢ちゃんはこんなにいい子なんですから、いつかきっとちゃんと見てくださいますよ。我慢だなんて、としえさんにはいつもお世話になりっぱなしで。嬢ちゃん。
Nothing about our household had changed in years. As always, our lifestyle was dependent on Toshie-san's quiet assistance. She took care of us all without a single complaint. But I hadn't seen my grandparents show her gratitude for everything she did. Not even once. Toshie-san's son, who lived with his wife in the neighborhood, clearly wanted to pry his mother away from her unrewarded servitude to the Kawamoto family. I'd overheard them having a heated fight on the topic. Our life was the same it had always been, but beneath the surface, it was slowly coming apart at the seams.
としえさん、もう来てくれなくなるのかな。
One day, I was making my way along a sloping road I had once walked with my mother, bombarded by the cries of cicadas. The area around my grandparents' home was a district with strict regulations on the height and variety of buildings, so the scenery hadn't changed much in the years since my mother entered the hospital. It was picturesque in a way that seemed to appeal to rich people. Many city dwellers had their second houses nearby, but I could never come to enjoy the scenery. It left me cold. The things that mattered to me changed for the worse, but the things I hated, the things that left me cold, never seemed to go away. Driven by frustrating, indistinct feelings of powerlessness, I began to walk faster. But with a flinch of surprise, my leg suddenly came to a halt.
やあ、おはよう由美子ちゃん。学校に行くところ？ 歩きながらでいいからさ、ちょっとおじさんの話に付き合ってもらえないかな。
After that moment of hesitation, my legs began to move once more, faster than before. Striding along almost like a race walker, I hurried down the road leading to my school.
お父さんがね、最近またちょっとおじさんの耳に入ってくるようなことをやっててね。それで騒ぎになっているんだよ。二宮さんって由美子ちゃんの知り合いにいなかった？ちょうどお母さんと同じぐらいの年の女の人なんだけど、もし知ってたら何でもいいんだ、おじさんに教えてくれないかな。それとこれは由美子ちゃんの家のことなんだけど、お母さんが昔お父さんと一緒に暮らしてた時にお手伝いをしていた人の。
おじさん。
お、なんだい由美子ちゃん。
Coming to an abrupt halt, I turned to face the man.
前にも言いましたが、私何も言いません。質問にも答えません。
あ、
だからこうやってまとわりつくのをやめてください。
いや、だからだね由美子ちゃん。
名前で慣れ慣れしく呼ぶのもやめてください。失礼します。
やれやれ、父親譲りだなありゃ。
There was one significant change in my stagnant life. A reporter from a gossip magazine, whose job seemed to consist of digging for information on my father, was making a habit of loitering around me. I had first met him during the winter of my first year in junior high. At the time, I was still comically naive. He approached with kind words and sympathy, two things I wasn't used to getting, and convinced me to open up to him about my family circumstances. Pathetic as it was, I didn't realize it was all for an article until the moment my grandmother threw the tabloid in my face and delivered a furious scolding. Humiliated and bitter, I swore to myself to never again discuss personal matters with strangers, or to trust their compassion. And despite it all, the very same journalist had the nerve to show his face in front of me again. Every time something happened, he'd come around sniffing for scraps of information. Speaking with him felt like brushing against an enormous and particularly slimy leech. I marched ahead as quickly as I could, one fierce step after another, trying to shake off the lingering residue of our encounter. But then again, the place I was hurrying to wasn't exactly pleasant in its own right.
駅前んとこのさ、ロータリーのとこでヤマッチいたんよ。声かけたらあいつ逃げやがってさ。
あいつ最近付き合い悪いよな。彼女できたのかな、やっぱし。
嘘、山地誰かと付き合ってんの？
あれ、知らんかった？ C 組の木本いんじゃん。あいつどう？あ？
It would have been much easier if they simply treated me like I didn't exist. Their clumsy method of ignoring me could sometimes be a weapon as sharp as any insult. I was well past the point of letting each and every sudden silence weigh on my mind, but it still wasn't exactly a pleasant feeling.
今日も来てんぞ。
あいつ成績はいいけど母親は入院してんだよな。
きっとあの子もさ、そういうのを。
The more I tried to ignore them, the more their whispers seemed to pierce their way into my ears. A year had passed since I first set foot in the school. By then, there wasn't a single person in my class who didn't know all about my family. There's no such thing as privacy in the countryside. The real nature of my mother's illness, which should have been kept absolutely confidential by the hospital, had filtered all the way down to middle schoolers' gossip. A purely academic question occurred to me. If this wasn't despair, then what exactly would qualify?
ここも逃げられない。
I opened my sketchbook beneath my desk, making sure nobody could see. I'd kept at my art, and flipping through the book, it was obvious that my ability to depict fine details had come a long way in the last year. But all that really proved was how obsessively I'd sought escape, how deeply detached I'd grown from the world around me. Rather than pride, I felt something like nausea. Even my art was beginning to lose its value as a refuge. The room was pure white. Nothing had changed here. Not the room. Not even my mother's posture in her bed. It was as if I'd never left. Every time I walked in that door and saw her sitting there, I felt a surge of irrepressible pity run through me.
お母さん、来たわよ。
あ、由美子。いらっしゃい。
As always, I saw my mother in profile. As always, her gaze didn't turn to me. As always, she smiled quietly. But there was no tenderness in that expression. She was simply moving her face into that shape. It was an empty imitation of a real smile.
本持ってきたから。
I lowered a small bundle of books and weekly magazines my mother had requested onto the shelf beside her bed. They usually came with the mail, but sometimes I happened to run into a nurse who would then hand them over to me for a more personal delivery.
そう。ありがとう。
Of course, the weeklies in question were respectable, established publications that largely kept away from the scandals and rumors circulated by the tabloids. We couldn't take the risk of her reading something like that article I'd unwittingly contributed to the previous winter. It would undoubtedly set back her treatment, which was already proceeding slowly enough. My mother's newfound reading habit seemed to be part of an attempt to learn more about my father and the company he was running. Looking at that thick pile of magazines and books, I felt my chest tighten at her obvious desperation. Mom had never known much about the business. I would have been surprised if she could understand half of what she was reading.
ご飯残してるみたいね。看護師さんが言ってた。
そう。
今度、トシエさんにご飯作ってきてもらうね。病院のよりはずっと美味しいと思うから。
そう。
Our interactions followed the same familiar pattern. I chatted away relentlessly, while my mother muttered vaguely. Lately, even those monosyllabic responses had grown repetitive and careless, almost as if she was beginning to treat the world with the same careless disinterest my father had shown her. It was a particularly difficult visit. My mother barely spoke, and I ran out of things to say fairly quickly. As the hours I spent at school had grown increasingly suffocating, I was spending more and more time wandering around in searches of quiet places where I could be alone. These days, I frequently found myself lacking for stories to tell.
そろそろ帰るわ。
I rose quietly from my seat. My mother's face, as always, didn't turn toward me. It had been a truly pathetic excuse for a conversation, and I had little hope tomorrow would be any better. The things I wanted to stay the same fell apart. The things I wanted to change stayed exactly as they were. Time no longer seemed to be flowing. It was a stagnant, brackish pool, and even treading water was becoming a struggle.
あなたが。
But as I prepared to leave, my mother spoke. That hadn't happened for quite some time.
お母さん。
That one word came as a complete surprise. Was she about to say something? Despite it all, I found myself pausing expectantly, hoping for some positive sign. Thinking the matter over calmly, it was foolish to even imagine her mood had suddenly changed. But I was so starved for a glimmer of hope that my mind latched onto the most optimistic possible interpretation. And then, with a few simple words, my naive happy end scenario shattered like the fragile piece of glass it had always been.
あなたが男の子だったらよかったのにね。
My mother had never said anything like that before. No doubt the thought had crossed her mind, but so long as she had even a shred of rationality remaining, the words could have never passed her lips. After all, if she were to say that, then nothing could ever change, except to fall apart.
なんでそうじゃなかったのかな。
something slipped out of my hands and clattered to the floor. A visitor from the company had dropped off a few jelly desserts. I had been taking one from the shelf with a spoon. My mother had been skipping her meals lately, but I thought she might at least manage to eat that. Considering the season, a white peach jelly seemed appropriate. Maybe it would be easier for her to hold a spoon with a flat handle. Moments before, those were the only thoughts in my mind. They were gone now, obliterated by my mother's words so completely that it was as if they never existed. I ran as fast as I could, pushing my heart so hard I thought it might just sputter to a stop. Down the slope in front of the hospital, up again, onto a large curving detour, past the station, around the corner from a small cleaning store, into the remains of an abandoned factory. Only then, absolutely confident that I was alone, did I finally come to a halt. Gasping for air, I doubled over and held my trembling legs with both hands, propping up a body that seemed ready to collapse. The world flickered before my oxygen-starved eyes. My peripheral vision was dim and clouded, as though I was peering out from inside a tunnel. I could feel sweat pouring out from all over my body. My hair and clothes were completely disheveled. I'd fallen at some point on the way over. There were scrapes on my knees and elbow. I pushed myself erect, a tattered mess of a girl. But I couldn't have cared less about any of that. After all, the tears streaming uncontrollably down my face were far more blatantly pathetic than my beat-up clothing. I could have endured it if she'd complained about something I could fix. I could have behaved better. There was still room for my grades to improve. I could have made myself more presentable. I could have cut every strand of hair to the exact same length. I could have learned to walk in a refined way, at an absolutely steady pace. But no matter what, I was powerless to undo the reality of my own birth. Why did she have to choose the one thing I could never, ever change? My grandparents were right back then. If it was possible, she should have just tried again. She should have crushed that egg in the womb and pretended it never happened. Better that than this hopelessness, this irreparably broken life. Placing my hands against my breasts, I pushed down with all my strength. How could a thing so totally beyond my control bring me such misery? I felt a dull, throbbing pain deep inside my chest. The painful pressure was accompanied by a slight twinge of stimulation. Even as I rejected it, my body reminded me that I was female. There was pain, but at the same time, I could feel the blood throughout my body beginning to stir in an unfamiliar way. Instinctively, I knew that it was something sexual, and I shivered with pure loathing. I hated my body. I hated the woman it was becoming. I didn't ask for that misery. I had no say in my crime. It was born with me. But so long as I lived, the pain would always be lurking somewhere deep inside me. If only you'd been a boy. With one phrase, anyone could reduce me to nothing. I could study all I wanted. I could be the sweetest, most well-behaved person in the world. But so long as I stayed in that body, my naked vulnerability would never go away. I threw open my bag and took out my pencil box. Flipping open the lid, I retrieved the box cutter I used as a makeshift sharpener for my colored pencils. I wonder when exactly I began to find the act of cutting things apart pleasant. The clicking of the blade emerging from its sheath, the sound of something once whole being severed apart. Those had become calming sounds to me. How wonderful would it be if I could slice away my femininity with a single box cutter? How wonderful would it be if I could sever my fate with the touch of a blade? How wonderful would it be if one movement of my hand could cut me free of all the troubles that coiled around me and choked the air from my lungs. As I cut savagely through the long, identical bundles of black, such thoughts ran through my head one after another. On the boiling concrete, speckled with the remnants of faded paint, clumps of black gathered. They fell like a vile rain until the sun-heated ground was covered in them. I could feel the gloom in my heart fading as I looked down into the darkness. But in its place, that dirty blackness left a layer of filth inside me that could never be cleaned away.
バカマジちげえってそれ。
嘘つけ、それお前は。おい、見ろよあれ。
なんだってうわっ何あの髪型。
男みてえだよな。
切っちゃったのかな自分で。かな。でもなんで？
あいつんちまた金なくなったんじゃないの？
まさか散髪代ぐらい出るだろうそれ。だよ
ね。
When I showed up for school with a hairstyle more appropriate for a boy, my classmates' reaction was exactly what I'd expected. They made no effort to hide their amusement. I'd gotten that far uneventfully, not giving them much to work with, so perhaps there was a bit of a recoil effect. Whatever the case, my rough bob cut became an easy target for mockery and speculation. Of course, there wasn't a single person there who showed any concern for me. My grandmother was simply lost for words at first. Not that the aghast expression on her face meant she was worried about me.
そんなみっともないことはこれっきりにしてちょうだい。わかりましたね。
The one and only thing she was concerned about was how poorly my actions would appear in the eyes of society.
はい。ごめんなさい。
まったく恥ずかしい。
My grandmother, muttering about shame and humiliation, averted her eyes and disappeared inside the house. And for a very long time, I sat alone in my room, utterly silent, except for the voices of the cicadas.
おう、由美子嬢ちゃん、どうなさったんですか、その髪。ごめんなさい。嬢ちゃんは何も悪くないのに、おかわいそうに。
Toshie-san was the only person who showed genuine concern for me. But it didn't make me feel any better to know that I'd make the kind old woman worry. More than anything else, her sorrowful face made me regret my rashness. I'd gotten carried away with my emotions and lashed out, but nothing had changed. Nothing was ever going to change. For the sake of the one or two people who acknowledged my existence, I decided not to repeat my mistake. Toshie-san's death came soon thereafter. As the record-setting heatwave stretched on, the news was constantly occupied with stories of elderly people succumbing to heat stroke. And one day our neighbor, already past her 70th year, was among them.
すみませんが、お帰りいただけませんか。そんな、せめてお焼香だけでも。由美子さん、あなたも知ってるでしょう。母が倒れた原因を。それはお給金が出るわけでもないのに、ねぎらいの言葉すらかけてもらえず、川本の家のために働き続けて。申し訳ないと思っています。だったらもううちとは関わらないでください。もう川本の家とは一切の関係をなくしたいんです。地元でも変な噂が立ってますし。
おい早苗、それぐらいにしておきなさい。
はい、わかりました。それじゃこれで。これ たかった。
Your world is supposed to grow larger as you grow up. Mine seemed only to be shrinking ever smaller. I'd lost Toshia-san, and with her, the small place of refuge in front of our door vanished as well. Hey everyone, J Square John Jeremy here. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to click on subscribe and the bell icon to ensure you're kept up to date on the channel. Until next time, so long and take care.